At 30,000 feet, the Pacific stops being an ocean and becomes a map. Lines and bearings, winds and targets, distances that once protected an empire now measured in hours. Out of contrails and sunlight comes a shape that doesn't belong to 1944. A smooth-skinned giant with a pressurized spine, a glazed nose like a surveyor's eye, and turrets that aim by periscope and computation. It is not simply another bomber. It is a machine designed to make distance irrelevant. Inside, crews breathe cabin air at altitude that would freeze lungs in an older ship. Beneath them, 4 temperamental R-3350s claw the thin sky, turbo superchargers spinning like watch springs wound to the breaking point. In the belly, a bomb bay the size of a boxcar. In the brain, radar that can see through weather and night. Guns are not manned from windblown blisters, but directed from pressurized stations by a central fire control mind. Remote, precise, modern. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress carries with it a promise and a problem. That the Pacific's vastness can be crossed at will, and that the price of learning how will be paid in fire, sweat, and lives. From Chengdu's muddy fields to coral runways carved from Marianas rock, this aircraft will bend doctrine until it snaps. Precision at high altitude collides with jet streams no one planned for. The ideal of daylight accuracy gives way to a new calculus of range, weather, radar, and flame. Cities built of wood and paper become fuel. Sea lanes become choke points mined from the air. Factories move from assembly lines to ashes between midnight and dawn. And at the end of a terrible arc, specially built B-29s will carry weapons whose light erases the horizon and forces a nation to choose surrender over annihilation. This is the story of a bomber that arrived early from tomorrow, too advanced for the manuals written for yesterday, too important to wait. It is the story of engineers racing the calendar, of mechanics fighting heat and time, of crews learning a new way to wage war at altitude and at night. Above all, it is the story of how a single airframe, married to industry, logistics, and ruthless adaptation, turned the Pacific's shield into a highway and changed forever how wars are won from the sky. Requirement to reality, design that outran doctrine. You begin with a requirement that sounds like a dare, a bomber that can fly higher than flak can reach with accuracy, farther than a continent across, faster than interceptors can comfortably climb, and do it with a crew working in shirt sleeves. In 1939 to 1940, American air doctrine still worships the clean geometry of daylight precision at medium altitude, with tight box formations and bomb sites promising to put steel on a factory roof. But the Pacific is not a map of rail hubs and compact targets. It is blue emptiness, weather without walls, and distances that turn formations into fuel problems. The engineers hear both the doctrine and the ocean, and they design for the ocean. The Boeing answer takes shape around 4 ideas that, together, make the B-29 feel like it slipped a decade forward. First, pressurization. Instead of freezing men in unheated leaky greenhouses at 25,000 feet, the Superfortress carries its crew in sealed capsules, the forward compartment from the nose to the wing spar, the aft compartment behind the bomb bays, and an isolated tail position, linked by a narrow pressurized tunnel arcing over cavernous bays. No more oxygen masks icing your face for hours, no more gunners fighting hypoxia along with fighters. Pressurization doesn't just protect the crew. It changes what is possible. It means sustained operations at 30,000 feet, where thinner air robs flak of bite and gives engines room to make power with turbo superchargers. Second, power at altitude. Each nacelle houses a Wright R-3350 duplex cyclone, 18 cylinders, 2 rows, with turbo superchargers spooling like turbines to force thin air to behave like sea level. On paper, the numbers are intoxicating. A heavy bomber that can cruise near 300 miles an hour at altitudes that B-17 and B-24s treat as brief visits. In practice, the engineers are honest. You pay for that performance with heat, maintenance, and a learning curve that will be measured in scorched cowlings and emergency fields. But the premise is non-negotiable. To turn the Pacific's shield into a highway, you must make altitude routine, and you must carry fuel like a tanker. The wing is therefore a gas tank with lift, broad, high aspect, careful about drag. And the fuselage is a pressure vessel with bombs. Third, firepower without drag. Instead of manned blisters sprouting like barnacles, the B-29's defenses are remote. General Electric's central fire control system turns gunnery into a network. Periscopic sights, stabilized in computing, talk to electrically driven turrets that sit where the aerodynamics prefer them. 2-gun and 4-gun stations, top and bottom, fore and aft, are slave to whichever gunner has the best solution. Range, lead, and motion are fed through analog brains that hum with transformers and cams. The tail carries its own sting. The point is not novelty. The point is speed, altitude, and endurance without the penalty of open tubs and wind-beaten men. At 30,000 feet, the fight is geometry and timing, not muscles and frostbite. A formation of superfortresses can cover itself with fewer bodies and less drag, and that translates to range and payload, the currencies that matter in the Pacific. Fourth, the instrument that sees what eyes cannot. Precision from 5.5 miles up asks too much of optics alone. The atmosphere itself becomes an enemy. So the B-29 is born with antennas and promises. Bombing radars that can paint coastlines and cities through cloud and night, navigation beacons that whisper fixes across oceans, automatic pilots that can hold a heading while the bombardier rides a scope. Early sets are bulky. Their displays a language crews must learn in the dark, but their logic is irresistible. If weather and darkness rule the Pacific, then the bomber must make weather and darkness irrelevant. Put these ideas together and you get an airframe that doesn't fit the manuals. It is longer, smoother, and more tightly sealed than any American bomber before it. The skin is flush riveted to cheat drag. The bomb bays come in 2, split by the pressure tunnel like twin boxcars, allowing flexibility in loads and, later, a path for modifications nobody can yet imagine. The landing gear, tall and wide, is sized for coral islands that don't even have names in most school atlases. The cockpit is a glass hemisphere with a navigator and bombardier seated not in the wind but behind it, surrounded by charts and instruments that make an ocean navigable. Doctrine struggles to keep up. The Norden bomb sight, symbol of daylight precision, still rides in the nose, but the aircraft around it quietly undermines the assumptions beneath it. A pressurized crew cannot stand at open windows to scan the world. A radar scope can place aiming points under a cloud deck. A central fire control system means gunners are managers of solutions, not soloists with throttles and triggers. The box formation itself, designed to concentrate overlapping fields of fire, looks different when each airplane's turrets can be masked by logic rather than proximity. Even crew roles shift. The flight engineer becomes the quiet center of gravity, eyes on manifold temperatures and cylinder heads and fuel balance, nursing the big rights through thin air. The radar navigator becomes a second bombardier, a second eyes on target when glass is useless. The demands ripple backward into industry. To pressurize a fuselage, you must build it like a submarine with windows. Tolerances tighten, sealants multiply, and inspection becomes a religion. To feed four R335Os at high power for long legs, you must rethink fuel systems, lines, pumps, and firewalls. To make remote turrets precise, you must teach factories to mass-produce gyros, amplifiers, and slip rings the way they once stamped wrenches. The airplane is a system, and the system is only as strong as the slowest supplier. The design also smuggles in a philosophical shift. Earlier, heavy bombers were airplanes that carried bombs. The Superfortress is a flying campaign. Its range and altitude mean basing can be strategic rather than opportunistic. Its pressure hull means crews can arrive less broken. Its radar and navigation mean the commander can plan around targets rather than weather forecasts. All of that suggests a new kind of war from the air, less about heroic formations braving flak over a single target, and more about sustained pressure over a theater where logistics, maintenance, and tactics are tuned as tightly as engines. Even the numbers tell a doctrinal story. Payload at altitude is not a guess. It is a graph the engineers bend with every pound of drag shaved and every gallon of fuel carried. The B-29 promises to lift a city's worth of incendiaries to heights that make anti-aircraft gunners curse the curvature of the earth. It promises to reach from China to Kyushu, then from the Marianas to Tokyo, then from island to island, with mines in its belly to turn shipping lanes into trap lines. It promises to do this not once, but night after night, if the ground echelons can feed it engines and tires and replacement parts and the new talent required to keep a pressure bomber tight. And yet, from the moment the prototype leaves the runway, the airplane reminds its creators that futures are expensive. Heat blooms in nacelles that look sleek in drawings. Baffling and cowl flaps become combat systems. Fire extinguishers earn their place on checklists. The remote turrets work beautifully in test cells and need practice in turbulence. Radar can see through clouds and also sees reflections in clutter that only experience can interpret. Pressurization saves lives and punishes sloppy riveting with whistling leaks. Nothing about the Superfortress is casual. Everything is interdependent. But this is why the design outruns doctrine. It is built not for the last war's assumptions, but for the next theater's physics. In the European Air War, range is measured in a handful of hours, and weather, while vicious, is bounded by land. In the Pacific, the trip to the target is itself a campaign, over water, through jet streams that no bomber force has met before, across a country built of wood, paper, and narrow workshops rather than concrete and steel. The B-29 carries the answers to problems most commanders have not yet fully framed. It brings the altitude to get above monsoon and mountain, the endurance to cross blue deserts, the sensors to navigate and aim without daylight, and the structural strength to come back on 3 engines, or 2, or with a bay that didn't close and a turret locked out. When you step back, you see what Boeing and the Army Air Forces are trying to do. Take the tidy math of precision bombing and stretch it across an ocean until it becomes an industrial act. The Superfortress is not the perfection of an idea. It is a bet that range, altitude, sensors, and systems can be combined into a single instrument capable of changing a theater's geometry. It is ahead of doctrine because doctrine is a story about how you think tomorrow will work. The B-29 is tomorrow showing up early, demanding new chapters. Radar in the bombardier's hierarchy, engineers at the commander's briefings, maintenance battalions as decisive as bomb groups, routes and winds as lethal as fighters, and a new willingness to trade guns for gas when the mission demands it. The airplane rolls out with all of that potential sealed into its skin. On the ramp it looks clean, almost simple. A silver cylinder with a glazed nose and a high, purposeful stance. Inside, every inch confesses a new logic. Pressurized bulkheads, long cables and looms for electrical power, black boxes that hum with microwaves, a crawl tunnel arched above bay doors, sized for the weight of a strategy. It will take months of trial and correction to unlock that logic. It will take new bases carved out of islands, new training syllabi, new spare parts lists, new kinds of briefings. But the shape of the future is there, rivet by rivet. Requirement has become reality, and reality has already stretched the requirement. The manuals will be rewritten in flight, the war will teach, and the airplane, impatient with old ideas, is ready. Build at scale, factories, fixes, and the Battle of Kansas. Scale arrives like a second invention. One airframe is an achievement. Thousands, identical enough to share parts and procedures, is a national act. The B-29 demands 4 assembly lines and a continent of suppliers. Boeing in Wichita and at Renton on Puget Sound, Bell at Marietta outside Atlanta, and Martin at Omaha on the plains. Around them orbit a constellation of shops stamping ribs, casting turbos, winding looms, machining gun drives, Chrysler, General Motors, Goodyear, Cessna, Briggs, and dozens more. Every crate of bolts and gyros is a vote that this airplane will decide a war. On the factory floors, silver fuselages glide past caged scaffolds. Flush rivets are polished smooth, pressure bulkheads are sealed and resealed, black boxes hum under test as if thinking. At Renton and Wichita, the wings and pressure hulls are a new doctrine in aluminum. If the bomber is a high-altitude ship, it must hold air like a submarine. Quality inspectors learn to listen for leaks with stethoscopes and soap bottles. The schedule says thousands. The learning curve says not yet. The engines are the truth tellers. Write R3350S promise power at altitude but punish impatience with heat. Cylinders glow, baffles warp, exhaust valves fail, oil kindles and finds magnesium. Fire's so hot the word firewall sounds like a joke. NACA engineers dive into the metallurgy and airflow, reshaping heads for better heat shedding and redesigning fuel distribution, so each cylinder gets its share instead of some going lean and licking at metal. Cooling is no longer a maintenance trick. It's survival engineering. Hap Arnold reads the reports and does not like what he sees. He goes himself, Selena, Pratt, walks the cold aprons and cavernous hangars, and comes back furious. The program is the #1 priority, he says, but what he saw was chaos, missed deadlines, confusion, leadership gaps. The order that follows is unmistakable. Fix it now. The fix will acquire a name half joke and half battle honor, the Battle of Kansas. Kansas becomes a moving machine. At 4 airfields, Salina, Smoky Hill, Pratt, Great Bend, and Walker, modification centers bloom like emergency cities. Trains offload parts, trucks ferry crates to hangars too small for a superfortress, so crews work outside in freezing wind. Boeing, Bell, and Martin send specialists. Vendors ship kits. The Army Air Forces floods the fields with mechanics and inspectors. For 44 days in March and April 1944, through night shifts and sleet, they replumb fuel lines, rewire looms, reseal pressure joints, tame turbos, and chase the gremlins that live in a first-of-its-kind machine. On the worst days, parts arrive in ambulances. Spare engines get hoisted into bomb bays to ride along to war. By April 15th, the last B-29 rolls out, combat ready, right on the Blitz deadline. 2 months later, they are bombing the Japanese home islands. The phrase, "build at scale," hides what it feels like. It feels like a sergeant with a clipboard and 20 tasks marked urgent and none marked optional. It feels like a flight engineer in a parka checking baffles with numb fingers. It feels like river ice in the wheel wells and a rivet leaking air under a starlit Kansas sky. It feels like a gunnery tech aligning a central fire control turret in a wind gust, knowing a fraction of a degree matters at 5 miles. And it feels like a foreman reading a telegram that says the schedule is not a schedule. It is a war order. Training grows alongside metal. Crews learn a new language, cowl flaps and intercoolers as combat items, fire warning lights that mean, get the checklist now, pressurization differentials and the arithmetic of oxygen, radar scopes that turn weather into silhouettes and coastlines into aiming points. The flight engineer, once an assistant, becomes a guardian, hands on levers and gauges, mind ahead of the engine. Radar operators learn to bomb by cathode glow when glass is blind. Gunners become systems managers, handing turrets between stations and letting the analog brains compute lead. Every hour on the ground in Kansas buys minutes of survival over Hainan or Tokyo. Logistics stretches a red thread from the prairie to the front. The route to India sprawls across maps and oceans, out of Kansas to the East Coast staging fields, then to Gander, then across to North Africa, Marrakesh, then the long hop to Cairo, across deserts to Karachi, and finally down to Kharagpur and the Bengal fields. Some airplanes carry a spare R-3350 slung in the bomb bay. Flight crews leapfrog by transport where possible. But the Air Transport Command is always oversubscribed, and priority passengers bump others to the next flight. What looks like a ferry mission on a line chart in practice is a test of an Air Force's ability to move its own shadow. Everything is heavier than it seems: tools, spares, people. Air Service Command learns to stock a pressure-sealed bomber, different sealants, different valves, new gauges and testers. Crates of radar sets move with security tags and special handling. Engine shipments become a drumbeat. Valve guides, new heads, redesigned impellers. Each change a memo to every maintenance tent halfway around the world. There is no single fix. There's a swarm of fixes, and each must find its target through weather, distance, and bureaucracy. The factories adjust as the field reports harden into instructions. Renton and Wichita incorporate running changes, thicker baffles here, a new access panel there, a revised loom that resists chafe where a bundle kisses a bulkhead. Martin and Bell fold in the lessons too, though differences between plants mean differences in problems and cure. Modification lists multiply, dozens, then scores, until production engineers treat change as a fifth dimension of the airplane. In October 1944 alone, one survey counts well over 100 mods queued across the 4 plants, with Renton bearing the heaviest slate. That is not a failure. It is how a new species matures in wartime. Through it all runs the schedule. XX Bomber Command needs aircraft now for Operation Matterhorn. India to China to Japan and back, with fuel hauled over the Himalayas. The target is not a single date, it is a cadence, enough aircraft delivered, modified, and crewed to begin sustained operations. Kansas provides the surge, the factories sustain the flow. On April 15, 1944, with 150 aircraft accepted to XX Bomber Command, the transition from prototype to presence is complete. The superfortress is no longer a promise, it is a force. The Battle of Kansas leaves a mark beyond headlines. It teaches the Army Air Forces how to fight a systems war, how to marry a design to a supply chain, a test report to a factory change, a winter storm to a new work practice, a commander's fury to a result. It shows that a bomber this advanced is not an airplane you merely build. It is one you field with a choreography of industry, modification, training, and movement. It proves that the difference between almost ready and operational can be measured in hangar space, gasket compound, and whether a truck shows up at midnight with the right crate. And it buys time. Time that will be spent learning the next set of truths in combat. The Chinese bases supplied over the hump cannot carry a strategic campaign alone, that the Marianas will flip the map, that winds at altitude will make Norden promises bend, that radar will become the bombardier's second sight. But none of those lessons would arrive if the first lesson, build its scale, fix its speed, had failed. The Pacific is still wide. The B-29 is now real. The road from Kansas runs all the way to Tokyo. Learning to fight from China to the Marianas. The first lessons come not from flak or fighters, but from arithmetic. In India, the B-29 staged forward to China for Operation Matterhorn, and every sortie begins with a supply mission. Fuel, bombs, and spares have to be flown over the hump across the Himalayas. A heavy bomber becomes its own tanker, hauling gasoline to the very fields it will later launch from. The numbers are brutal. A single Chengdu, Japan round trip drinks on the order of 7,000 gallons. Tonnages needed each month run into the millions of gallons, even with pipelines in Bengal and Chinese airfields hacked out by hand tools. The airlift can never quite keep pace. The superfortress can reach the home islands from China, but only by spending precious range on logistics before it ever meets the enemy. They make a practice run on Bangkok from India on the 5th of June, 1944, then stage to China for the first strike on the home islands since Doolittle, Yawata, night of the 15th to the 16th of June, 1944. The flight is long, the climb slow, the stakes obvious. Radar guides most of the bomb runs. The results are meager. Losses and mishaps on takeoff and landing take their own toll. The raid proves more than it destroys. The B-29 can hit Japan from China, but not often, not easily, and not with the weight required to bend an economy. Over the next months, Matterhorn drops only hundreds of tons on the home islands while consuming a significant share of hump capacity. The verdict hardens. This theater-sized supply problem is strangling a strategic idea. Crews learn new habits in China. The flight engineer is no longer a quiet assistant, but keeper of temperatures and baffles, living minute to minute with the R-3350's heat. The radar operator becomes the bombardier's partner, taking the aim when glass is blind. Briefings add a new column beside enemy defenses, weather. Routes and altitudes are tuned not only for fuel and flak, but for winds aloft that nobody fully understands yet. Even success, hitting industrial Kyushu from Chengdu, forces bitter trade-offs. Every bomb dropped has been paid for in flights of fuel days earlier. The airplane can do it. The theater cannot sustain it. The map flips in the summer of 1944. Saipan falls on the 9th of July, Tinian on the 1st of August, Guam on the 10th of August. On their coral backs, engineers scrape out super bases measured in parallel concrete. North Field on Tinian will become the largest airfield on Earth. Now Tokyo is roughly 1,500 miles away. The highway the B-29 was built to drive finally exists. Sea-supported, pipeline-fed, within 12 flying hours of the target. The 20th Air Force shifts its weight. 21 Bomber Command will fight from the Marianas, while the China-based 20 Bomber Command winds down. The first Marianas raids confirm what the crews suspected over China. The Pacific sky has a personality. On the 24th of November 1944, 111 B-29s launch for Tokyo's Musashino Engine Works and run into a river of air, the jet stream, screaming exactly where high-altitude doctrine wants them to be. With winds up to approximately 200 miles per hour, formations stretch and aiming solutions drift. Bombs march off target. Some ships are shoved over the aiming point so fast their runs disintegrate. The Norden's promises meet physics no European daylight force ever faced. Accuracy collapses, not because the crews are timid or the bomb sight is a fraud, but because the air itself is moving faster than the manuals imagined. So radar stops being a novelty and becomes a strategy. AN/A, PQ-13, Mickey sets let navigators paint coastlines and cities through cloud and night. Synchronizers tie radar to the bomb site and autopilot. Later, specialized wings adopt the AN/APQ-7 Eagle array for fine-grained mapping. It is still an art, scope reading, drift correction, aim point interpretation, but the logic is irresistible. If the weather and the winds won't yield, then the campaign must. The B-29 was designed to make daylight, high-altitude precision possible. Experience is teaching that night, radar-directed mass may be the only reliable lever over Japan. Meanwhile, the crews and maintainers relearn the airplane for ocean basing. Coral dust chews at tires and engines. Salt air wants every connector and seal. But the logistics are suddenly sane. Ships bring fuel by the million gallons. Spare engines stack like cordwood. Airfields offer 4 parallel 8,000-foot runways and hundreds of hard stands. Training flights become warm-ups to the Bonins and the Volcano Islands. Reconnaissance charts the winds. Tactics evolve by the week. The lesson from China, you can't bomb strategically on a shoestring, is replaced by a new one. With range, basing, and supply finally aligned, the airplane can be used not in fits and starts, but in streams. By early 1945, the pattern is clear. What began as an extension of European doctrine, tight formations, daylight glass, altitude as armor, has been forced to bend around Pacific weather and Japanese geography. High-altitude jet winds ambush the Norden ideal. Radar becomes the second sight, and the Marianas transform distance from a shield into a schedule. The superfortress is teaching its own war. Fight the theater first. Winds, bases, supply, and the target will follow. The next step is as radical as it sounds. Drop lower, fly at night, change the load, and turn Japanese industry's wooden heart into a weakness. General Curtis LeMay is about to bet the campaign on it. Reinventing the campaign, LeMay's gamble. Command changes hands, and with it, the campaign's center of gravity. Curtis LeMay arrives in the Marianas in early 1945 with a reputation for ruthless clarity. Solve the problem you have, not the one the manuals describe. The problem is not courage or numbers, it is physics. At 30,000 feet, the jet stream tears formations apart and throws bombs miles off aim points. The Norden is precise, the air is not. LeMay listens to crews, reads the blind spots baked into high-altitude doctrine, and proposes a heresy that sounds like simplicity itself. If the winds live upstairs, then fight downstairs. If cold, thin air cooks engines and scatters bombs, then use warm, dense air. If gun weight buys little against night flak and rare interceptors, then trade guns for gas and bombs. If daylight demands accuracy the weather won't grant, then use the night. The order set is short and shocking. Strip most defensive guns and armor. Keep the tail for warning and a sting. Load incendiaries in place of high explosives. Go at night, down around 5,000 to 8,000 feet, in massed streams that arrive not as a tight parade but as a rolling thunder of aircraft over hours. Navigate and bomb by radar, not glass. Fly each airplane at its best speed and height for the winds that night, not for a doctrinal formation. Make the target a burning idea you can see from 100 miles away, and let the bomb run be a mechanical act. A generation raised on daylight precision hears sacrilege. Crews who have watched bombs chase whitecaps hear logic. The weapon fits the plan. Japanese industry does not live in single great plants behind brick walls. It is distributed. Machine tools in side streets, subcontractors in wooden neighborhoods, cottage workshops feeding assembly lines. Walls are paper and wood, roofs tile and tar. Incendiaries, clusters of small bomblets that punch through roofs and then spray flaming jellied gasoline. Turn that construction into kindling. High explosive breaks, water mains, and fire brigades. Incendiaries do the rest. Radar leads the stream to the first city. pathfinders light it, then weight and wind carry the fire. The rehearsal is brief, the proof is terrible. Tokyo, night of March 9th to 10th, 1945, Operation Meeting House. The first wave lays a fiery X across a working-class district where industry hides in houses. Subsequent waves fill in the lattice. At low altitude, the glow becomes its own navigation. The night wind that mocked daylight bombing now feeds the flames, and a firestorm climbs into the sky. Crews feel heat through aluminum at thousands of feet. On the ground, the city becomes a furnace of roars and gutters. Canals boil with burning fuel. Fire breaks fail. The destruction is industrial and human at once. Losses in the stream are real. Flak, searchlights, engine failures, but far lower per ton of bombs delivered than the high, cold daylight method had yielded. In a single night, the arithmetic of the campaign changes. The momentum is immediate and merciless. Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, Yokohama, night after night, then again after repairs, then again until the maps themselves are different. Streams of B-29s lift from the Marianas' parallel runways, climb only as high as the winds allow, and fall on cities drawn as targets by their own materials. Incendiary loads evolve, mixes of clusters and larger tanks, timing fuses and spread patterns tuned to neighborhood density. Radar crews learn the grammar of the scope, coastline blurs, river angles, harbor shapes. Bombardiers who grew up on glass accept that a bright burning grid is a better aim point than an assembly hall roof they will never see. LeMay's calculus is not just about bombs. He treats the entire machine, factory to flight line to cockpit, as a single weapon. Trade-out kits remove turrets and ammunition feeds. The weight savings go straight to fuel and incendiaries. Engine handling changes at low level. Dense air cools better. Cowl flap habits alter. Fuel mixtures adjust for endurance instead of altitude. Takeoff spacing and stream timing become arts in themselves, orchestrated so the target never rests. Maintenance schedules bend around a new reality. There is no oxygen frost in turrets to fight. There are instead brake wear, coral dust, salt. The average time aloft drops relative to the China days, which means more sorties per airframe if the ground crews keep pace. The campaign becomes a schedule more than a spectacle. Moral certainty does not attend this shift. The photographs that come back with dawn are not of a smashed engine works, but of square miles of ash. The rationale is clinical and unsentimental. Dispersed war work in wooden neighborhoods cannot be neutralized by nicking a single roof. To kill an industrial system embedded in a city of wood, you must make the city burn. That is not an evasion of cost, it is a choice that names the cost. In the briefings, the language stays hard and precise. Targets, loads, drift, winds. In the debriefs, the language is quieter. Crews speak of turbulence and heat, of the smell at altitude, of searchlights wandering without finding. The war is no cleaner at 5,000 feet than at 30,000. It is simply different. The enemy adapts as best it can. Night fighters search the streams. Flak belts shift from altitude bands to choke points. Decoys try to seduce radar. But Japan's resources are draining. Aviation fuel, trained pilots, radar sets, anti-aircraft ammunition, even the fire services that once raced through neighborhoods. When the streams change city names, factories everywhere fall behind. The Army Air Forces keep two plays in the book: night area attacks to tear out the urban workshops, and selective daylight raids under favorable winds against aircraft and engine plants when weather and intelligence say a specific blow will pay. The B-29 is not one trick. It is two complementary modes used like a wrench and a hammer. Then comes a third tool: mines. Someone asks a simple question: if Japanese industry runs on ships, why not strangle the sea? The answer becomes Operation Starvation, an ugly, accurate name for a precise campaign. B-29s fly low at night along straits and harbor mouths, laying strings of influence mines, magnetic, acoustic, pressure, programmed to wake after a delay and to trigger on the signatures of passing hulls. The targets are bottlenecks, the Shimonoseki Strait, the approaches to Kobe, the inland sea. Mines do what bombs can't. They wait. Merchant skippers slow to a crawl, naval escorts sweep and die, pilots avoid lanes until everything moves too little and too late. Shipping losses spike. The tonnage that does arrive is months behind and a fraction of what the islands need. Aerial mining, done with radar and nerve, becomes one of the single most cost-effective missions of the war. Results show up in ledgers as well as photographs. Fuel that once fed inland factories sits in tank farms for lack of barges. Coal piles shrink. Rail yards back up because ships have not come in. Steel allocations turn into paper promises. Aircraft production, already battered by fire, falls off again for lack of parts that once moved by water at night. The strategic logic is not complicated. Burn the workshops, then choke the replacements, then burn the temporary fixes. The pace is pitiless because pace is the point. Every week Japan cannot repair, cannot ship, cannot sleep under blackout without fear, is a week the war moves toward collapse. The gamble was never only tactical, it was doctrinal. LeMay's shift announces that means, altitude, formation, bomb type are servants of ends. The end is not a perfect bomb pattern photographed at noon. It is the systemic failure of an enemy's war-making capacity as quickly as possible. That means the bomber force must be willing to become a chameleon, high when winds allow and precision demands, low when physics dictates, radar-led at night when weather rules, stripped for speed when defenses wane, rearmed when they thicken. It means accepting that a central fire control marvel can sit idle to save weight, that a pressure hull designed for 30,000 feet can work just as well 5,000 feet above a burning grid, that a crew trained for pickle on the crosshairs can instead set an intervalometer and ride a compass heading into a glow. The cost never vanishes. Even at low level, even at night, there is flak and there are fighters, and the Pacific is still a desert that swallows airplanes with single failures. Engines still quit, tires still blow on coral, weather still builds walls from horizon to horizon. But the ratio changes, the exchange of risk for effect improves dramatically. Tons on target per sortie leap forward, losses per ton fall, maintenance per ton becomes manageable. And crucially, the campaign's time, the only currency that matters once the invasion of the home islands is a real plan with real names, compresses. By early summer 1945, the combined pressure of night incendiary streams, selective daylight precision, and aerial mining has done what daylight boxes from high altitude never could in that theater. It has forced a modern industrial society, built largely of combustible neighborhoods and seaborne lifelines, into a state of chronic failure. The B-29 has not only survived the Pacific's physics, it has made them work for it. The bomber that came from the future has found the doctrine that matches it, a system of engineering, logistics, and tactics that uses altitude as a tool, not a religion, radar as sight, not gimmick, and mass as a schedule, not a shape. The stage is set for a final grim acceleration. Specially modified superfortresses already sit apart on the hardstands, their bomb bays and wiring changed for weapons the size of automobiles. The city grids that proved so vulnerable to fire will soon face a different light. And even as that chapter nears, the lesson of LeMay's gamble is already written. Doctrine bends to physics, not the other way around, and when you bend it fast enough, a war bends with it. Shock and aftermath, silver play to surrender and beyond. They sit apart on the hard stands at North Field. Cleaner lines, fewer guns, new wiring mapped like a nervous system. The crews have different checklists, different briefings, different locks on the doors. The code name is Silver Plate, and the modification list is a map of a single purpose. Strip weight, quicken the bomb bay doors, harden the bay for one weapon instead of many, reroute cabling and switches so a single release becomes a ritual with safeguards. Where other B-29s carry streams of incendiaries, these carry an argument that the war can be ended with 2 flights. Training starts before the weapons are ready. Crews practice with pumpkin bombs, conventional shapes with the same size and drag as the new device, so the ballistics and the sight pictures live in muscle memory. Technicians rehearse the arming sequences again and again until the choreography feels like a prayer said in the right order. The airplane is the same from a distance, but up close it is a different instrument, lighter without most turrets and armor, tuned for range and climb, with a bomb bay turned into a cradle. On the 16th of July, 1945, in a New Mexico desert far from coral runways, humanity crosses a line of light at Trinity. News moves along narrow channels. Code words do more work than sentences. Out on Tinian, the work sharpens. Targets are studied for weather, topography, and the cruel calculus of demonstration. Cities large enough to make the weapon's effect undeniable, yet not previously burned to near ruin by incendiaries. Crews kneel over maps in blacked-out rooms and talk about wins, fusing, aiming points, escape headings. 6 August, 1945. Enola Gay lifts before dawn with a long, disciplined climb. In the bay is Little Boy, a gun-type uranium device, inert until the final minutes. Weather planes run ahead. The rendezvous is made. The run is clean. The bomb falls for seconds that feel like a lifetime, and then the horizon writes a new kind of morning. White core, rising column, shock that slaps metal. Radios say little, cameras watch. The crew flies, the escape turn is briefed. Below, an industrial city vanishes into a sun-bright cloud and a charcoal bruise. In the hours and days that follow, the photographs and the reconnaissance reads are numbers on paper. Blast radii, destroyed districts, rail spurs cut, bridges gone. What the numbers cannot carry is the human scale of heat and radiation. 9 August, 1945. The second mission does not go to plan. Boxcar launches with Fat Man, the plutonium implosion device, and a stubborn fuel transfer problem that will haunt the pilot all the way to the target. Primary aim point Kokura sits under cloud and drifting smoke. Flak and time push the crew to the secondary. Nagasaki opens between breaks and cover, and the weapon falls through a momentary window. The blast piles mountains of air into a ring. The crew turns for Okinawa with fuel needles sliding toward empty. The landing feels borrowed. In Tokyo, leaders receive 2 kinds of news at once. 2 cities erased in 3 days, and the Soviet Union's entry into the war on the Asian mainland. The strategic options narrow to a single word. The B-29 force has not been idle while Silver Plate prepared. Since March, the incendiary streams have destroyed much of Japan's urban industry, and aerial mining has throttled the sea lanes. Refineries, power plants, and rail hubs, when weather and winds allowed, have been hit by selective daylight raids. By August, the campaign is a vice. Burn the workshops, starve the shipping, break the power, then shock the leadership. The atomic missions do not invent pressure. They end the debate over whether more pressure will matter. On the 15th of August, 1945, the Emperor's voice reaches his people by radio for the first time. The words do not say surrender, but they carry surrender's weight. Engines fall silent over the home islands. Missions already planned are recalled or retasked to leaflet and relief. The war that taught the B-29 how to fight is over. On the 2nd of September, beneath gray skies in Tokyo Bay, signatures on paper make what the airplanes already enforced a matter of record. The shock has an afterlife. In the first piece, B-29s drop survey cameras instead of bombs, tracing damage patterns for analysts who want to know what worked and why. Operation Crossroads comes next. B-29 delivery of test devices at Bikini Atoll to study what atomic weapons do to fleets. The superfortress that carried fire now carries data. In hangars, engineers who fought baffles and leaks turn those lessons into production changes and new marks. Strengthened structures, refined engines, better radar. Silverplate itself evolves into standardized nuclear-capable variants. The airplane that ended one war becomes the scaffolding for how the next one will be deterred. Doctrine shifts with the hardware. The Army Air Forces formalize a truth the B-29 made obvious. Strategic effect requires a system, not a sortie. In Strategic Air Command, created in 1946 and soon led by LeMay, the bomber ceases to be a seasonal instrument and becomes a standing practice threat, with checklists, alert rosters, global basing, and training rhythms that treat readiness as an industry. Early on, the B-29 and its improved cousin, later designated B-50, is the backbone of that force. Tanker versions, KB-29, learn to pass fuel in flight and quietly redraw the world's map by removing the last tyranny of range. Weather and reconnaissance variants, WB-29, RB-29, turn the airframe into eyes. Then another shock, jet combat. In Korea, the superfortress returns to war, at first in daylight, aiming at bridges, depots, and plants. The results are familiar. Where flak is the main threat, accuracy and persistence matter more than glamour. But when MiG-15 arrives, the arithmetic changes. On a grim day, remembered as Black Thursday in October 1951, daylight B-29s suffer unacceptable losses. The order is swift and cold. Move to night operations. The old airplane adapts again. Radar bombing, ECM jammers, pathfinders, timing runs after sunset. It can still cut rail lines and smash dams, but the age of the piston-engine daylight heavy bomber as a frontline daylight weapon is over. Speed and altitude have moved on. From that pressure comes the line that defines the next generation. If a bomber must outrun fighters and climb above flak, it must evolve. B-36 for reach, B-47 for speed and altitude with swept wings and jets, B-52 for endurance and payload in the new thermonuclear era. The B-29's fingerprints are everywhere. Pressurized cruise as a baseline, radar, autopilot, and bombing computers as standard. The idea that gunnery is a system, not a man in a blister. The assumption that global logistics, spares, fuel, bases, tankers, are part of the weapon. Even as later bombers shed most gun turrets and trade them for speed, the B-29's deeper lesson survives. Defenses are not just armor and guns. They are altitude, tactics, ECM, training, timing. There is also a quieter legacy. The B-29 turned navigation and bombardment into instrument disciplines equal to piloting. Scope-reading radar navigators, engineers managing engines as if they were laboratories, bombardiers riding synchronizers, and automatic pilots. These roles become the template for crews who will later ride inertial navigation and astro trackers across oceans in the dark. The airplane demanded professionalization and returned survivability and effect. For Japan, the immediate aftermath is ruin measured in maps, and then in rebuilding measured in years. The very sea lanes the B-29 mined soon carry relief. The airfields that launched fire now launch food and medicine. Occupation forces and planners walk streets that, months before, were seen only in radar outlines and flicker. They ask a second question after, "How did we do this? What now?" The long answer will be alliances and reconstruction. a place for Japan inside an order that tries to make the kind of war the B-29 fought less likely by making its costs unforgettable. In the United States, the memory hardens into doctrine: deterrence. The heavy bomber, starting with B-29s on alert, then bigger, faster aircraft, becomes a visible promise that any future war of annihilation will not be one-sided. LeMay's SAC drills the idea until it is a reflex. Crews asleep near aircraft, maintenance that never stops, routes practiced over empty oceans, tankers waiting at waypoints most people will never see. The B-29 did not invent the concept, but it gave the Air Force the living example that a large, complex machine can be kept at a constant boil without blowing itself apart. By the time museums polish their aluminum and schoolchildren file underneath those broad wings, the shape may look simple: a silver cylinder, a glazed nose, 4 big engines, a tall tail. But the B-29's real silhouette is bigger. It includes Trinity's flash and Tinian's runways, Kansas hangars at midnight and Korean skies at dusk, the quiet math of radar and the loud logic of fire, the supply ships and tanker booms, the briefing rooms where winds aloft mattered more than slogans. It reaches forward into every bomber that followed and backward into every factory worker who sealed a pressure rivet right the first time. Shock ended the war. Aftermath defined the peace. The superfortress bridged both. In combat, it showed that a bomber could be more than an airplane. It could be a theater-sized tool that fuses engineering, logistics, and tactics into a single instrument of strategy. In the years after, it taught that air power's true revolution is not a line on a performance chart, but a system that can be started, sustained, and aimed. That is the B-29's beyond.